Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I think it is my great honor to be invited here to serve as the moderator of this section, panel discussion. This panel discussion has 4 distinguished panelists from Somaliland, Taiwan, Thailand, Indonesia, respectively. I think the topic of the panel called Inclusive Partnership with Marginalized Groups. Theoretically, I think it is good and rightful that any public policy should be should include the voice and the demand from the marginal group, or we call disadvantaged group. But actually, in practice, it is difficult. It has the, not a very practiced action to include marginal group to express their opinion. But we should try. We should try. I think the citizen participation is a concept that we encourage people to participate in the public policy formulation and the implementation. But however, I think marginal group has his difficulty. But we should try and we should do the effort to become true. Okay, so today we have 4 distinguished 4 panelists. The first one is from Somaliland, Dr. Adan, Ismail. Let me introduce the doctor. Dr. Edna Ismail is an influential African woman with a long career in the field of health and championing the right of women. Cheng as a nurse midwife in Britain and appointed by WHO in 1965, but took leave in 1967 when her husband became Prime Minister and served her country as the First Lady. In 1976, she became Director of the Ministry of Health, pioneering the campaign for women's health and the first against FGM. And most importantly, with Somaliland's health care destroyed by Somalia, Edna founded the Adan Hospital, which is a major referral teaching hospital. And in 2002 to 2003, Edna was appointed the Somaliland Minister of Social Affairs. And further, from 2003 to 2006, she was her country's foreign minister. And Edna received various awards, also was nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. The topic Dr. Edna will present is the Republic of Somaliland's nation building, I think, because I look at the overview, the PPT before, and I think this is about the Republic of Somaliland's nation building and the healthcare development. So let us welcome Dr. Edna. Please, welcome, please.
In my country, and there is a map just to show you where my country is. Next. This is when my husband was Prime Minister, and this is in the White House in Washington. Next. We will go very quickly through the pictures. This is also in the White House with President Johnson. Next. Then there was war. That is when health care was destroyed. Next. War brings destruction. Next. Destruction brings death. These are mass graves where innocent victims were put into mass graves. Women, children, old, whatever. Next. And that is, of course, brings the result of there's no healthcare, there's no water, there's no sanitation, there's no immunization, there is no jobs. Everything stops. People run away, go and fight for their lives and seek protection. Next. And of course, if there is any little going, women are always last in the queue. Whatever there is, if there are jobs, women don't get it, men get it first. If there is any opportunity, women are never there. They're never represented. They have no decision-making opportunities. They are not counted. Next. Of course, maternal mortality rises. This is the biggest barometer that will show you the situation of health of any nation. Maternal mortality rate tells you how good or how bad healthcare is. And of course, what is bad for women is also bad for children. Women die, their children also die. Next, please. This is the situation of hospital that was left by Somalia. How can people care for sick people in a dirty, infested, infected environment like that? And that is what made me very hurt, that I was working with the United Nations. I had great positions, and my people were living under such conditions. So I decided I would go home, I would build a hospital, and I will show the world and my people what you can do with your determination. Next. And next, please. So I started building the hospital. Next, next, and next. The hospital was opened on a site where Somalia used to kill innocent victims. This is now the Edna Hospital. Next. But it is not a hospital. It's not the building that looks after the sick. It's the skills of the health professionals, the doctors. There were only 17 doctors in my country. My country has 4 million population, only 17. No trained nurses, no laboratory technicians, no pharmacists, no surgeons. This made me decide to train health professionals. Next, please. I'm hearing sound, but I'm not sure if you're hearing it too. And I've lost the picture. Next, I can't see the picture. I'm sorry, can you see me? Can you see? Okay. I cannot see the screen, I cannot see the slide, but just continue going and I will speak in the dark. I cannot see it.
Can you listen? Can you listen to us?
Yes.
Yes.
Now you have come back. Thank you.
Okay, please, go ahead.
So, when the hospital was opened, I decided that the best thing I could do is to train nurses. The picture has come again, but just continue. Next, please. This was the first nurses we trained. Next, next, next. We have now delivered 27,000 women. Unfortunately, we have also lost 72 women. This makes our maternal mortality rate 261 per 100,000 live births. It is a very high number when you compare it to developed countries. But before the hospital was built, the maternal mortality of the Somali women was 1,600 per 100,000 live births. So we are now maybe 1/4, 1/5 of what the previous maternal mortality rate was. But 261 women to die of eclampsia is too much, of infection is too much, of obstructed labor is too much, of postpartum hemorrhage is too much, because these are conditions that science has found a solution to control. But when people are poor, when people have not had an education, when the system of health has been destroyed, people die, and women die, and their children die. After we train nurses, next, please. And next, just go to the pictures, please. Today, we have medical schools, nursing schools. We have trained our own anesthesia technicians. We had no anesthesia technicians in the entire country. Today, every regional hospital has an anesthesia machine and has a trained technician and has a surgeon who has at least had 1 year of training in obstetrics and gynecology. But, dear participants, healthcare is not only maternity care. There are other sick people who need to be looked after. There are old, young, women, men who have accidents, who have illness. Next, please. But today we have women. Next. Today we have a hospital where men and women and people, sick people, are treated. And we also have women. For the first time in my country, we have women surgeons, women pediatricians, women obstetricians, women anesthetists, women lab technicians. And in my university, where we have 1,500 students, 70% of the students are female. I am proud and I am grateful to God that we have moved our country from a place of death to a place where men and women are holding hands to save the population. But, dear participants, 260 maternal mortality rate per 100,000 still tells us that we are far from success. We have made great improvements, yes. We have made great strides, yes. But there is still a long road to go to achieve improved healthcare for our people. Now, what do we do? Somaliland is one of the poorest countries in the world. Somaliland is one of the countries with the smallest literacy rate, even though it is improving now. But Somaliland has determination to work for the people, and we need partners, not to give us money, but to give us knowledge, to show us how to improve things, how to look after the sick better, how to improve what we are doing. If we are doing it well, to do it even better. We need to make academic strides in research, in epidemiology. We need to have quality control, and we need to have partnerships. We need to share with the world the achievements that Somaliland has made under very difficult circumstances. And we need to learn from others how they too have overcome their problems. Next, please. Next. Next. We need to fight traditional practices, harmful traditional practices. Our tradition is rich and we should preserve it when our traditions are good. But when our traditions are bad, like female circumcision and like burning, this child you have on the screen is a child that was born with hydrocephalus. And instead of taking this child to the hospital, they burnt it because they believe they can burn the disease out. They have caused this child even more pain and suffering. So we need to fight ignorance. We need to build confidence in our people to come and seek healthcare. We need to provide affordable healthcare so that the poor, the neglected, the one living in a distant location will have access to affordable and efficient, appropriate healthcare. Otherwise, our people will suffer the consequences of harmful traditions like this poor child has. Next, please. Again, next. Next. We have, because of poverty, because of malnutrition, because of deficiencies in the diet of the people, there is a high incidence of congenital malformations and complications. We see a very high number of spina bifida, of hydrocephalus, problems associated with folic acid deficiency. When people are poor, this is what happens. When people are ignorant, this is what happens. We need to help our community in a reasonable, equitable, efficient way to prevent the preventable diseases and complications. We cannot protect somebody from getting hit by strike of lightning, but we can protect our women and our children from folic acid deficiency, iron deficiency.
可以吗？所以我们要结束这个这场 speech 吗 ？OK， 好，因为可能线路的关系了哈。OK，sure， thank you。可以吗
I'll be happy to answer any questions that the audience may have.
Very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Adan. I think your presentation is very inspiring and deterring. I think you make a greater effort and contribution to the establishment of the healthcare in Somaliland, in your country. Especially, you save a lot of people, especially women and the children's life. So I think I agree with you fully that the best way that stakeholder can contribute in an inclusive partnership would be to help Somaliland rebuild its education at all levels and help us rebuild our basic health service by helping us with postgraduate education for our health worker. So thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may also add that I fully support
Yes.
the focus that was presented by Thailand, by Taiwan, the conference suggestions. I fully support it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we shall move to the second panelist. The second panelist is Ms. Emma Li. She is the Director General of International Development Division in Adan Social Welfare Foundation. This foundation is the largest disability group in Taiwan. Ms. Li focus on global disability issue and participate in international disability network since 2002. She is also the, the representative of Adan Foundation in major international organizations such as International Campaign to Ban Lemai. I think Miss Lee holds the Master of Art in Communication Study from University of Leeds, UK, and also the licentiate of Theology from Bible Institute of South Africa. Okay, so the topic Miss Lee will give us is the, please hold on. It's about the inclusive partnership with marginalized groups in practice, Malaysia, especially Malaysia and Vietnam. So she will talk about the challenges and the solutions. So let us welcome Ms. Lee, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kuan. It is our great pleasure to have this opportunity to present the inclusive partnership with the marginalized groups from Eden Social Welfare Foundation. I also feel very privileged to speak after Dr. Edna. Since I myself have been in Africa for 8 years, I do see the marginalized groups in Africa is also has a huge need for our help. But today I will start from the work we are doing mainly in Asia to talk about the inclusive partnerships we do in this region. Yes, I will give the outline for the presentation about the Eden's concept in inclusive partnership with marginalized group. And then I will also give in the two major examples about the inclusive partnership we have. One is in Malaysia and one is in Vietnam. And then we also face some challenges, and then we try to look for the solutions as what we can share with the audience here, and then we will come to the conclusion. First of all, I would like to talk about Eden's concept of partnership with marginalized group. It's actually part of Eden's mission statement. In Eden's mission statement, we have the serve the weak is from the concept of the Bible says about to serve the least of brothers, as what Jesus said is as serving the Lord. So partnering with a marginalized group is actually part of Eden's nature. Therefore, we see ourselves is in the same boat, in the same direction with marginalized group together to ensure the well-beings for the, especially for the people with disabilities and then vulnerable people. Here are the major groups we have partners with, from the children to the adults and the elderlies, and especially with the late mine victims, and also as they have been injured because of this very old-fashioned weapon. They have also become the persons with disabilities, and that happens in Asia also, as what Dr. Edna just said about, is also happening in Africa a lot. And then the way we starting our inclusive partnership, we start to participate in the international NGOs as to build up Eden's international network. We can learn from the international society and we can mobilize the resource, and we can also serve the needs in the right place. So therefore, we especially started from the international campaign to ban landmine, and then we joined the decade plan for disabled persons in Asia Pacific region. And we also been thinking of the work ability for people with disabilities. Therefore, we are in the Workability International and the Workability Asia. And also for the rehabilitation is quite a major part of the disabled people's needs. So we are also part of the major organization is the Rehabilitation International. And to promote accessibilities, we work together with the Transportation Research Board in the States. And then definitely we need the manpower and volunteers effort. So we are also part of IAVI, the International Association for Volunteer Effort. So this is our network, and also through this network, we start to participate in the international society, and also to build up our inclusive partnership. And the other network we have is Eden's privilege to go through the global church network, which is the Eden International, the Double Blessings Network, which means as we are the faith-based organization, so we started from Malaysia, which is the one I'm going to talk about today, and then we start from Malaysia, and then we go to Vietnam, and we go to China, and then we go to Thailand, and even now we are in Myanmar. And this is how we do our partnership with also through the church network, and also with the Christian organizations at the local place. So we have the same faith, and then we have the same heart to serve the weak. So I would like to first of all talk about the examples we partnered with the dual blessings Berhad in Malaysia. And this is the first branch we have in the region, started from Penang in Malaysia in 1991. And then we go to the second branch in Kuala Lumpur in 2001. This is not only through the church network to build up our partnership in the local place. We have also, through this work we have in the local place, we start to particularly to focus on enrich the lives for the persons with disabilities. And we carry out our mission to promote the rights for the disabled persons, and also to rebuild their lives, and then to encourage their independence. And so in the 2002, Eden started to join the Asia Pacific Disability Forum, has become the official member, and as now we are even in their executive committee members, the board, together with Malaysia and also with other countries to call for the accessibilities. So we work with so-called the DBM in the church network, and also to encourage the Malaysian government to particularly focus on to implement their policies for the disabled persons' welfare. So we also working with the DBM in vocational trainings, and also to raising the social awareness and the advocacies. And we also bring our partners to the international organizations to participate in the international platform. And also particularly like we also inviting the group to attend such as Asia Pacific Accessible Arts Festival to let the disabled persons have the opportunity to present their talents. But we do face the challenges in the local place. I think the most difficult part is about how to improve the physical and the social environment in Malaysia. And we found that the government do have the good policies and the good regulation, but the problem is about the implementation. So we share our models and our experience in Taiwan with our partners in Malaysia, and to let them know how to do advocacy to the government and how to monitor the implementation of government's policies. So we even go to the Malaysia to go with our partners to go on the street to show to the government that disabled people do have a right. They need to move. They need to have an accessible bus to be able to do the things they want to do. And then we are now even working on to fostering more social awareness and participation in disabilities, and which is focused on to make the public in Malaysia to know that the importance of the disability rights, and also to continue the advocating for the person with disabilities. And even we establish an accessibility platform in the region, particularly is to talk about the move free, the rights for the disabled persons. And the next example I would like to talk about is through the international campaign to Bay Lay Mai. As I just introduced about the way we built our inclusive partnership is start from the international network. So as we joined the international campaign to Bay Lay Mai since 1996, so we have particularly working with the international campaign to Bay Lay Mai, which is ICBL, to focus on their Lay Mai survivors network. And through the Lay Mai survivors network, we learn about the local NGO in Vietnam, especially after the Vietnam War in 1960s. There are also a lot of Lay Mai victims need to be helped. So we work with Association for Empowerment of Persons with Disabilities, which is AEPD, in Thong Hai in Vietnam, to particularly helping this organization to work in the local community for vocational training, and then also to improve the psychosocial and the economic well-being for the person with disabilities. And I think it's particularly including survivors who have been injured and disabled by landmines or even by the unexploded ordnance, which is something probably we only familiar with this in our Kingman Island, but actually there's still a serious problems in the world. So the way Eden partners with AEPD is we have our role and AEPD has their role. From AEPD side, we have AEPD will do the local assessment and also the monitoring, the work the implementation. And from Eden's side, we will mobilize the resource and engaging the international stakeholders to join this partnership. And then we are very happy to see APD after the partnership with Eden Foundation. They start the vocational training projects. They also have the community advocacy training, and even can do the MyRisk education training, and also the rehabilitation workshops for the person with disabilities. And through this, we also see the organization has been empowered. They can get themselves even more engaged with international and the national, local stakeholders to involve in their work, and also to strengthen their projects. So in the future, we are also working with APD in the regional platform for advocacy on the victims' assistance. This involves the UN Convention in Migrant Treaty, in the Convention for the Cluster Munition, and also the significant Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we have the multi-stakeholders activities as Eden to partner with APD through the international campaign to pay LEMA, and also the LEMA Survivors Network. We will be able to also participate and also partners with the campaign in Asia. And so we together to develop more partnerships, and so we also able to encourage APD to have more talks with Vietnamese government, and also to make more advocacy on the rights of the LEMA victims. And here are the organizations also involved in the regions with us together in this platform. But we do face the challenges in Vietnam. I think there are several Taiwan NGOs working in Vietnam. We all see some similar problems. But what we experience is the main challenges here. First of all, the concept of a civil society in Vietnam is still the subject, what government they are wary of. I think in a communist country, government always want to be the most powerful mechanism rather than the power from the civil society. And then secondly, advocacy is still a sensitive word in Vietnam. So the local NGOs are actually, they are reluctant to use the words such as like advocacy. They rather say they will encourage people, they will inviting people come together, how they just try to avoid advocacy. And the third challenge we have is not easy to build trust and the partnership with government to develop civil society. We try to visit Vietnamese government officials and to talk about the importance of developing civil society. They are just smiling and happy to see us, but eventually the answer is still like they will think about it, but still no certain answer. Okay, the solutions we have is we do bring these challenges we have to have the multi-layered communication in the international level and the regional level, and even at the local level. And besides that, we also try to engage more other countries in the region, and also other organizations in the local country, which means we also working with other Vietnamese groups together to get government more attention on this issues, and also together to show the local government that it is possible we work together to meet the country's development the priorities. As we know that recently Vietnam, they have a so-called 2020 to 2025, the 5 years goals. So that's what we are trying to talk to the Vietnamese officials, that we will also like to working hard together with them to reach the goal. So which is also make them have more trust with the foreign NGOs in Vietnam.
So your time is up.
Okay.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I will just quickly, this is just a summary of our model. I have just bring out from the 2 examples, and just show that Eden work together at the same time, work with the international NGOs and with the marginalized group partners, so that we are like input and output. So it's always like a life circle to encourage this partnership. In my conclusion, I would say the strengthen international partnership network is a way to build inclusive partnership. Especially now we know that the Goal 17 in Sustainable Development Goals, what UN has announced, which is important to have international partnership networks to work together and ensure the partnership are always include the local marginalized group and their needs, which means we are not there to infuse our way or our models to them, but to make the local group have more opportunities to promote themselves and to have more ownership and to have more social engagement. And we also empower the marginalized groups and then the local partner organizations, so which is to improve the access to the local groups to have more opportunity to the technology, innovation, and knowledges for strengthen their projects.
Okay.
So the last one I would say, we always say in Eden Foundation is wherever there is a need, there is an answer from Eden. This is our spirit of our international work, which is just exactly fit to the leave no one behind as what the SDGs emphasize on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Emily, for your presentation, talking about the, the way of the Adan Foundation to establish the international partnership network with other international INGO and or other government. I think include the difficulty and the improvement way to how to to establish this partnership. It is not easy, but I think this is a very comprehensive presentation to talk about that topic. So thank you very much. Okay, so we should move on to the next panelist. The third panel speech is from Bangkok, Thailand. Mr. Themba Lewis. He is the Secretary General, Asia Pacific Refugee Right Network in Bangkok. Mr. Lewis holds graduate degree in refugee study from the University of Oxford and the American University in Cairo. He has taught on refugee rights in Bulgaria and Egypt, provided legal representation for detained asylum seekers in the United Kingdom and is a registered member of the Law Society of England and Wales. Mr. Lewis also was editor-in-chief of Right in Exile. The topic Mr. Lewis will speech is about nothing about us without us. Why any lasting solution for refugee will fail without substantive refugee inclusion. So please, we welcome Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. First of all, I won't introduce myself again. Thank you for the kind introduction. But I would like to say that I am indeed the Secretary General of the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, which is a network of more than 440 individuals and organizations, all brought together by the single purpose of trying to advocate for the rights of refugees and other people in similar circumstances. That membership is extremely diverse, not only in terms of geography. We stretch from Afghanistan and Iran all the way to you in Taiwan, in Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and out into the Pacific. But it also is diverse in terms of the issues that it engages around refugee rights, and it's diverse in its approaches. But I think what might be the most significant diversity that we have is that we are a network that is chaired by and substantially supported through the marginalized communities that we work with. We have a refugee at the head of our organization. We have refugees throughout the structure of our network to ensure that those communities are represented at every level and are engaged at the policymaking at APRIN, the organization. So I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, to the kind moderator, to the distinguished other guests, my fellow panelists, and of course, the participants there in the room for engaging on these challenging topics. I plan to speak to the issue of refugees and the imperative that approaches to refugee protection and assistance are advanced in the spirit of collaboration across a number of actors. Perhaps most importantly, the marginalized affected communities themselves. This presentation will highlight some of the urgent issues arising from current approaches to refugee solutions and the possibilities afforded by inclusive approaches. I'll begin by contextualizing the situation for refugees around the world and in this region more specifically. Following this, I'll speak briefly about the current state of refugee leadership in refugee response and sustainable development. I plan to reference some particular regional examples drawn from the current context and will provide some recommendations, brief recommendations at the end for progress in closing. So I'd like to begin, as the topic is not always the most well-known among many colleagues, I'd like to begin with a quick overview of refugees and refugees in this region. Of course, people seeking protection and fleeing violence and insecurity have been with us for much longer than the concept of modern states. But the refugee regime that we know now began with the League of Nations and a man named Fridtjof Nansen, who was an explorer and a scientist and a humanitarian from Norway. In 1921, he was the first League of Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and began the most ambitious refugee program the world had ever seen, which was solving the challenge of over 1 million Russian refugees scattered across Europe from the Russian Revolution. Nansen realized early on that facilitating refugees rather than disenfranchising them capitalized on the contributions they made and helped mitigate the negative consequences of forced displacement. He won the Nobel Prize, and the identification document that he instituted is the first official documentation recognizing legal status as a refugee. His solution to the refugee challenge then is the same as the solution today: recognition. After World War II, while Europe grappled with massive displacement, the newly formed United Nations drafted the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. The 1951 Convention forms the basis of international human rights law as regards refugees and asylum seekers. It elaborates the criteria that legally recognize you as a refugee and outlines the subsequent rights that you hold. UNHCR, the agency Nansen effectively established, was charged with supporting the implementation of that convention internationally. But now we find a world much less sympathetic to refugees. It's also a world that is disconnected from refugees by structures of marginalization, including walls and gates. Refugees themselves remain absent from decision-making about their lives and futures, unable to influence the narratives around them, and often living in spectrums of society from which it is difficult or dangerous to emerge. Many millions live in confined camps. Here, in Thailand, these camps have remained in place for the last 30 years. The camps in Bangladesh are subjects of constant diplomacy, massive humanitarian concern, regional private and public mobilization, and global interest. As very few regional states have ratified the 1951 Convention, only a handful maintain any domestic law protecting refugees. The result is that refugee contributions to hosting societies and their own efforts to establish livelihoods often go unnoticed. But refugees have foundationally shaped modern society, and they're continuing to do so. When we consider popular movements for inclusion or the recognition of rights, they're most often led by the populations affected. Refugee advocacy does not fit that trend. Refugees do not have the opportunity to meaningfully contribute to the decisions being made about their lives, their priorities, and this limits the possibilities of those lives and the lives around them. The first substantive critical study of refugee assistance was aptly entitled Imposing Aid. As the title suggests, it documented a relationship between assistance providers and refugees that was entirely top-down, and it highlighted the flaws of that approach. The most prominent flaw, of course, is that no solution will be tenable without direct involvement and engagement with the people affected by that solution. A second is that such an approach ignores the expertise, experience, capacity, agency, and history of the affected communities. Refugees and host populations are the first responders in refugee movements, and they're designers of their own approaches to the challenges around them, based in their immediate needs. Imposing Aid, the book I mentioned, highlighted the failure of non-inclusive refugee responses as early as 1986. Refugees have been highlighting this failure for much longer. By creating self-designed livelihood systems, by establishing their own schools and economies, and by protesting conditions in exile. More recently, refugees have thrust themselves into the global policy sphere through the establishment of solidarity movements, refugee-run organizations, and national, regional, and global refugee-led networks. Nothing about us without us has emerged as the banner slogan for refugee-led advocacy across the globe. The phrase points to a history of sidelining, dismissal, and tokenism of refugee contributions in top-down strategies for refugee assistance and sustainable solutions for affected communities, including hosting states. Refugees have traditionally entered the discussion as storytellers or as subjects of profiles and photographs to strengthen appeals for donor support or community awareness. Very rarely have refugees the true experts of the refugee experience, been placed in positions of leadership and decision-making around their needs and their lives. Asia and the Pacific has led this movement. The Asia-Pacific Network of Refugees, APNOR, has organized cross-border refugee advocacy coordination meetings among refugee communities and has advised at the highest levels of global policy. Earlier this year, the Global Refugee-Led Network, of which APNOR is a member, released its guidelines for concrete action in meaningful refugee inclusion and participation. The guide presents a clear elucidation of key concepts in meaningful engagement, including questions of representation, the value of engagement, facilitating refugee preparedness, institutional reflection, and preventing tokenism. It identifies a number of high-priority transformative actions essential to effective and meaningful participation by refugees, or perhaps in our case, any marginalized community. These include facilitating ongoing, sustained access for those communities to the structures that are influencing their lives, financing refugee participation and refugee-led initiatives to make it actually feasible for these communities to engage, dismantling barriers to refugee participation. They could be legal prohibitions, they could be encampment, they could be detention centers, and identifying and addressing harmful institutional dynamics, which is really a process of self-reflection for those of us engaged in humanitarian or human rights work. It's the first document of its kind originating in a global refugee movement for inclusion. And whether willfully or not, policymakers have taken notice. Support for the refugee leadership movement was demonstrated at last year's Global Refugee Forum in Geneva, where NGOs and governments joined a pledge to renew, strengthen, develop, and implement internal policies, procedures, strategies, and practices which will maximize refugee and marginalized community contributions in all decisions affecting their lives and the lives of hosting communities. The pledge underscored that participation must be safe, inclusive, sustainable, and impactful, and ensure that meaningful participation and leadership of women, youth, elders, LGBTIQ people, and others is also essential. It signaled as well that refugee-led organizations were gaining traction on a global stage. There are challenges. The idea of an inclusive approach is appealing, but not without significant obstacles. These challenges are present in a cascading set of institutional problems. Refugees, by circumstance, rarely have access to the organizational and financial resources to advocate on their own behalf. In states with refugee laws in place, organizing is often a violation of conditions of admittance, and refugees risk losing their protection and face deportation for speaking up. In states without refugee laws in place, refugees exist in a legal void, subject to police roundups and detention if identified. Simultaneously, organizations established on the traditional model rarely allow for supporting meaningful refugee participation due to restrictions on engagement, both constitutional and institutional, and related often to donor requirements. Shifts in institutional thinking away from concepts of refugees as passive recipients of aid and towards instrumental actors in solutions can be difficult to instill in entrenched histories of exclusion. Refugees themselves are too often challenged by the daily necessity to provide for their families, secure their shelter, and advance the fundamental basics of their own survival. But we begin the process by looking at our own organizations and instituting approaches that ensure that we're facilitating initiatives established, developed, and led by marginalized communities. But also that we're creating a space within our own structures to ensure representation in key decision-making roles. Examining our own institutions and supporting refugee initiatives is only the first step. An inclusive approach needs to be fully inclusive. This means recognizing the roles played by other affected communities, host communities, previous refugee communities in particular. It also means recognizing and reconciling intersectional disadvantages based in gender, ethnicity, education status, or any other factor of discrimination. Symbiotic approaches engage key connections that can create lasting stability. Refugees contribute to local systems, and local systems engage refugees. Host and other affected communities are also the primary points of contact and response at times of crisis. Across the ASEAN states, fishermen have become the essential resource for refugees adrift at sea, and the governments of states across the Andaman Sea and the Malacca Strait. Fishermen are often the first providers of essential food and water, and as we saw recently in Aceh in Indonesia, local fishing communities are essential to protection. In June this year, Achenese fishermen defied the Indonesian authorities and pulled ashore a boat of Myanmar Rohingya refugees who'd been at sea for many weeks, welcoming them to Aceh. Conversely, in Malaysia, boat arrivals earlier this year prompted a xenophobic backlash to Rohingya, supported by fears around the COVID-19 pandemic and narratives of unearned entitlement and privilege. The political atmosphere shifted dramatically, and some refugees were returned to Myanmar, a violation of the International Convention Against Torture and the 1951 Refugee Convention, had Malaysia signed either of these. Only months before, the government had pledged to pursue refugee work rights off the back of an electoral promise to sign the 1951 convention. Things can change very quickly. Destructive narratives are only viable in the absence of a counter-narrative. Without directly engaging refugees and affected marginalized communities, that counter-narrative remains outside of the discourse. Despite restrictive policy, there are enormous advantages to engaging and supporting refugee-led initiatives. Refugee-led initiatives have developed schools in Indonesia and Thailand. They've raised funds for others facing destitution as a result of COVID-19, and they've created safe spaces for women and girls. Refugees are at the forefront of their own needs. Refugees are their own best advocates. Partnering between refugees, local populations, and labor initiatives, for example, can help develop work rights policies that are comprehensive, attractive to government, inclusive, and collaborative. Partnering around development initiatives creates tenable sustainability. Partnering around assistance provision ensures that the needs of affected communities themselves are heard. So to move forward in inclusive approaches, whether with refugees or any other marginalized population, the first step is for those of us that do not belong to those populations to listen.
Your time is up, please.
20 seconds.
20 seconds?
We need to recognize,
Okay.
20 seconds.
20 seconds.
We need to recognize the space we occupy and the potential we bring to the movement for truly representative advocacy and holistic support. We also need to engage with each other and non-traditional actors to create an environment that enables access and engagement. We need to ask the simple questions to start with and build from there. With that, I thank you all for your attention and efforts, and I look forward to discussing some of those simple and harder questions in the question and answer period. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis give us the speech. It's about the urgent issue arising from current approach to refugee solution, the possibility afforded by inclusive approach, the opportunity and the challenge you face, and the necessity of this dialogue. So Thank you very much for your presentation. So now we needed to move on to the first presentation. The panelist is Miss Annie, Lestari, Andayani Eddie. She is the chairperson of International Migrant Alliance. Miss Annie Lestari is an Indonesia domestic worker in Hong Kong. She is the founder of the Association of Indonesia Migrant Worker in Hong Kong and the chairperson of the IMA. So this organization is the first ever global alliance of grassroots migrant, immigrant, refugee, and other displaced people. She is also an active resource person in forum organized by academic, interfaith groups, civil society, trade union, and many other at the national, regional, and international arenas. Most importantly, I have to mention that she has actively participated in United Nations Assembly. The Conference on Development and the Migrants' Rights, and chosen as a speaker at the opening of the UN General Assembly on larger movement of migrant and refugee in 2006 in New York City, United States. The topic she will present is inclusive partnership with marginal group, perspective from migrant worker. So let us welcome Lestari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you so much for having me. This is my honor to be able to share and speak to you all. It is very unfortunate that I cannot travel to Taiwan. I wish so much to be there. There are hundreds of thousands of Indonesian, Filipino, and other nationality migrant workers, and I would like to reconnect with them, but unfortunately because of the COVID-19, I cannot make it. However, I hope that my contribution will be able to advance and also to enrich the discussion that we have today. My presentation will focus on the impact of the exclusion among the migrant workers. Especially, I would like to discuss in detail about the exclusion during COVID-19. In the last part, I will also discuss about what do we want as migrant workers. Just to introduce to you about IMA, International Migrants Alliance. IMA is a global alliance of grassroots migrants, immigrants, refugee, and also other displaced people. We were established in 2008, and 80% of our members are grassroots. So we are very much on the ground, especially during this COVID-19. Every communication we have is only through online. However, we were able to unite a lot of issues that we want the world to know, and we want to make sure that our message is going to be received by government and other policymakers. So before I discuss about the impact during COVID-19, I would like first to discuss about what is the life of migrants even, before COVID-19. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Sorry, I cannot see the slide. So, second slide, please. Okay. So before to start with, just to let you know that the population of migrant workers in the world, or migrants in the world, has reached 258 millions, and including of that number is 164 million migrant workers. When we say million migrant workers, it means people who are under contract 1 year or 2 years. And the number actually increased every 10 years. So the number of migrants never been decreasing in the past decades. Next slide, please. And most of the migrant workers are really working in the 3D, dirty, difficult, and dangerous type of job. We call it mainly in the service sector as a domestic work, factory, farm, or plantation, nurses, fishing, or other type of services. I'm sure even in Taiwan, you employ a lot of migrant workers in various service sector. Next slide, please. So before COVID-19, especially when the 2008 global financial crisis hit the world, the migrants, the refugee already suffer the most. So since the global financial crisis, a lot of things has changed for us. We have harsh working condition, and a lot of people are being laid off and deported. So people who remain in many countries are being overworked, and our wages has been decreased in terms of value, in terms of amount, and a lot of rights has been deteriorated. And immigration become very, very strict, and the border control become very cruel. You know now exactly the United States already create the wall between Mexico and the US, and many other European countries in Asia, many of them create what we call it a border control. And also increase the number of undocumented migrants, and even right to stay and right to settle for a lot of countries is getting more difficult. Countries like Australia, who used to accept application for permanent resident, now is making it very difficult, to the point of impossible even to settle down. And the violence and brutality done by trafficker, employer, and even local authorities, by the police, has been increasing. And since 2008, also a lot of scapegoating and targeting migrants, refugee, people of color in the war against terrorism. And you can see arrest, imprisonment, and deportation become very, very normal within the migrants community. And many of us also do not have right to unionism or association. Next slide, please. So that when the crisis in 2008 happened, really our life became very, very difficult. We start questioning, can we go home? Can we really go home and settle in our home countries? But the answer is no, because our country are too poor. We still have to live and support our children, our sibling, our parent. The living cost is getting more expensive, so there is no way for us to even go home, But to be abroad, to stay in other countries is also getting more difficult. We become a target of inspection, intimidation, arrest, and even deportation. And we feel very, very humiliated. But this is the time that we are trying to reflect. What are the migrants actually for our own countries? Why our own countries cannot even protect us? Why in time of a crisis like during COVID-19, our government even telling us to stay abroad, not to go home. So then when this is the time that we realize that for our countries, countries that send migrant workers, like Indonesia, Philippines, Bangladesh, and many more, migrant workers is just remittance, the source of remittance for the development. So it become a national strategy. That's why many government cannot let go the labor export program, because they rely heavily on the remittances that the migrant workers send back every month. And also, second, also the education system that we have in our own country has been designed for the purpose of the transnational or multinational corporation. So now people are learning English even when they are elementary school, not because we want to be intellectual or they want us to be intellectual. It's because they want us to be already English speaking. And the time when we graduate from high school or diploma or even university, we will be ready to work abroad. So the last thing also, the purpose is that being a migrant workers, our government is using us to tell the workers, to the peasant, the indigenous people, those people who complain or protest or asking for wage increase, to shut up. So if you don't want to accept, then you just become migrant. So this has become very conflicted situation in our part. Next slide, please. So what is the migrants actually for receiving countries, for countries that we are working for years, I myself have been in Hong Kong for almost like 20 years, and I believe many of my friends have been abroad even 10, 15, 20, 30 years, sometimes even throughout their life. So for many of the receiving countries, migrants is just a source of cheap labor for various service sectors. So that's why they create a cheap salary for us. And our salary is much lower than the local workers, or even sometimes compared to other workers. And we are also being trapped into the labor flexibility scheme. That means our contract is very temporary. Every 2 years, 1 year, once you are done, you have to leave. If you cannot find a job, you must leave. There is no way for us to even stay, to extend, or even to settle, and so forth. And also, every time there is crisis, we are being used as scapegoat. During this COVID-19, we can feel it strongly that, the public, the police, the authority always think that we are the COVID-19 carrier. It is very painful reality. And because of that, a lot of discrimination, xenophobia, getting more intensive now during this COVID-19. Next, please. So that's why in IMA has come up with our position and manifesto. This is actually the summary on our experience during this COVID-19. You are most welcome to have it later in IMA website. So we are already saying that even before COVID-19, we were already paid very low. We have very little benefit, and our immigration status is very unstable. So we live in really highly insecurity situation. But this COVID-19 make it double or even triple. And again, for us, we feel that we are just being treated as a commodity or source of cheap labor. We are not even human in the eyes of many government, policymaker, even the corporation. Next, please. So I'm going to show you a short video. This is about the testimonies of migrants, what happened to them during this COVID-19.
Solidarity, inclusion, protection, justice. Migrants, refugees, and displaced peoples everywhere call on governments for immediate and concrete resolutions to address their worsening plight under the COVID-19 pandemic. With the health and economic crisis plunging to new depths, the pre-existing socioeconomic vulnerabilities confronting them will only intensify. Lower wages, social exclusion, unemployment or slave-like working conditions, increased xenophobia and stigmatization, isolation. Many of them lack the income to send to their hungry families back home. Many of them remain stranded at the borders or floating in international waters. Many of them, whether in receiving or home countries, face hunger, lack of livelihood, and government neglect. Many of them have been subject to racism and discrimination.
আমার নাম রাসেল, আমি বর্তমান কাতারে থাকি। কক্সবাজার চকরিয়া পৌরসভায় আমার বাড়ি। কাতারে করোনা পরিস্থিতির মধ্যে 4 মাস লকডাউন থাকাকালীন রুমের মধ্যে বসে থেকে 4 মাসের মধ্যে আইডি শেষ, অনেক বেশি ক্ষতিগ্রস্ত হয়েছি। বন্ধু বান্ধব, বড় ভাই অনেকজনকে বিভিন্নভাবে কথা দিয়েছি, তাদের কথা রাখতে পারিনি। বর্তমান পরিস্থিতি অনেক ভালো, এখন দোকানে বসে আছি। তো দেশরত্ন শেখ হাসিনা, বঙ্গবন্ধুর কন্যা জননেত্রী শেখ হাসিনার প্রতি আমার একটাই অনুরোধ থাকবে, যারা দেশ থেকে প্রবাসে আসছে তাদের পরিবারের প্রতি একটা লাল আইডি কার্ড তৈরি করে দেওয়া হোক, যে আইডি কার্ড দেখালে প্রতিটা স্থানে, থানায়, হাসপাতালে, ব্যাংকে, যে কোনো জায়গায় যেন তাদের একটা গ্রহণযোগ্যতা থাকে প্রবাসীদের পরিবারের।
Sa haba-haba ng inintay ko from April, May, June, July, August, September na yung DOLE AKAP na application, financial assistance mula sa ating gobyerno ay hanggang ngayon nga pa rin, wala pa rin pong nakukuha, wala pa rin natatanggap na tulong mula sa gobyerno. Hindi ka naman mag-qualify sa SAP kasi OFW ka, sa akala nila mapera ka. So SAP wala rin, DOLE AKAP wala rin. Sa SSS, wala. Sa PhilHealth, wala rin.
Terus ditambah adanya COVID yang jelas sangat bertambah soal tentang kebersihannya, terutama tentang ruangan-ruangan pribadi dia gitu, seperti gagang pintu, lantai. Ditambah setiap pekerjaan saya harus melakukan ekstra bersih di mana menggunakan alat-alat bahan kimia seperti pemutih, terus deterjen lainnya yang saya nggak ngerti. Terus saya mengerjakannya berulang-ulang gitu. Terus setiap alat atau mungkin bisa dibilang barangnya dia yang bersentuhan dengan saya itu harus dilap lagi gitu. Hampir setiap hari saya kadang suka mengelap handle pintu yang setelah saya buka, sedangkan saya kan membuka pintu bukan sekali dua kali tapi berkali-kali gitu. Jadi setiap yang saya sentuh selalu saya lap. Terus kayak kulkas bersentuh dengan seraan rambut saya harus lap. Terus gantungan baju tersentuh oleh pakaian saya harus saya lap gitu. Dan terus menerus seperti itu gitu semenjak adanya COVID seperti ini. Yang bertambah parah, jam kerja saya lebih parah karena nggak ada jeda waktu untuk istirahat itu.
Tienen aquí encerrado a muchos morenos, a muchos negros, a muchos latinos. Aquí nos quieren encerrar y nos quieren deportar para darle a nuestros hijos una desventaja en la vida. Los hacen que sufren más a nuestros hijos. No les importa que nosotros nos deporten y que ellos batallen en la vida. Ese es un sistema que está pasando con este gobierno, con esta migración. Y también al mismo tiempo nos exponen a este peligro del coronavirus. Ellos quieren que nos enfermamos. Ya le hemos dicho muchas veces, mándenos otra vez con nuestras familias, queremos estar con ellos para que los cuidemos, pero no nos escuchan, quieren que estemos enfermos o que uno de nosotros nos muéramos o algo así. Les dijimos que hagan decisiones para que nos dejen salir con nuestras familias, pero no nos hacen caso. No nos dan protecciones como miras a mi alrededor, mucha gente a mi alrededor están aquí y pues nadie tiene protección. Y ya le hemos pedido muchas veces que nos den exámenes de la coronavirus, pero
You have 3 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
please.
yeah.
please.
I will conclude this. So the video that I just showed you, it shows how difficult situation during this COVID-19. Next slide, please. So in IMA, we already documented that this COVID-19 really heightened our vulnerabilities. Every day we are in the front line. Everyone work from home, but we cannot do that. But yet many of us also get infected and died. And yet the projection of people who will lose the job and deported will also be increasing. Next slide, please. So the impact on our health on this COVID-19. So a lot of people, migrant workers, whether they are unskilled or semi-skilled, even professional, many of them also died. They are mainly in the front line as a health, domestic worker, caregiver, entertainment. And many of those who are working in the factories, but they are staying in the very dense and cramped dormitories, like in Malaysia, in Singapore, also are being infected, and many also died. Stress become one of the biggest issue to all, psychologically, physically, and financially. As you see in the video, people work longer hours, they are in demand all the time, and financially, because they have to send more money, yet they also don't get any salary increase or financial assistance from government. More work and longer working hours because work and school from home. Hunger become our new problem, and also inhuman facilities for the stranded migrants. Next, please. So the widespread exclusion on services, protection, and relief program among migrants become our biggest issue. We are lack of information because all the information is only in English or in that Chinese or other national language. There is none in our language. And also denial of protection tools such as mask, sanitizer. In fact, many migrant workers do not receive any of this kind of help. And also lack of health services because we cannot just go to clinic or hospital whenever we are sick because of our immigration status. And also we are excluded from any financial relief that host government give away to their people. And denial of proper accommodation and dormitory, especially during the quarantine time, we should be the one paying the fee or the employer should be the one. There is no subsidy also from our own government whenever we are being deported back home. Next, please. So xenophobia and scapegoating among migrants is also very, very rampant now. We are being target of criminalization. We are being checked by the police, security in the park, and
Okay,
so on.
Annie, your time is up, please.
Okay,
Yeah.
can I have one
20
more
seconds,
minute,
okay?
please?
20
yes,
seconds.
okay.
Yeah.
So the last one, I want to maybe go to the last part. This is several demands that we are asking the government to do is to ensure inclusion, for us to have medical care, mass testing. We also asking for stop of the arrest and deportation, and also release all people who are in prison now because they will be infected by COVID-19. And also open the border, allow people who are being stranded to enter, and provide comprehensive assistance for us to all. And also protect migrant and refugee from any xenophobia and racism. And the last thing, I think we believe that the government must really fulfill their promises to any international convention they already ratified. Thank you.
Very much, Annie Lestari. I think you present a very important topic about the current crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, which highlighting the existing social exclusion against migrant workers in different parts of the world. I think although migrant worker law is an essential and frontline worker during the pandemic, but I think their safety and welfare should be guaranteed, where their right and should be protected. So thank you very much. So we go in this section. We go through four panelists presentation, which includes the different issue, include the healthcare, especially to the marginalized women, children, and refugee, and the social welfare, especially to the disability person. And the last one is the migrant worker. So I think the four issues are very significant facing in this world, especially in East Asia country, Vietnam, Taiwan, the Malaysia, Singapore, etc. So now we have about 10 minutes, okay, because the time is very, very short. So we have 10 minutes to do the Q&A. So maybe 3 questions, okay? And when you ask the question, please very shortly say your name, okay? Introduce yourself, very short, please. 3 questions, okay? Please. Anybody? Tony, okay, yeah, which one? Okay, sure, please. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. I have a question to Ms. Emily. Okay, you have said that you're working helping the disabled people, the special groups, and I hope you're helping them materially. And I would love to know, what about mental health? Are you doing any training or any kind of assistance to help their mindset? Because I know lots of them are insecure with their situations. So are you bringing that happiness and positive attitudes to them? That's my question.
Thank you for your question. Yes, we, Eden Foundation covered the service for disabled persons comprehensively, from the physical disabled situation to the mental disabled situation, and even to the psychological, the mental situation. So we do have the service centers for the mentally, for the people with the mentally disabled situation, and which we call the disabilities in the intelligence, or the disabilities in the in such as like Down syndrome, as like other even for the recently, I think the society needs more support, especially for people if have the depression, and then also the psychological support and the counseling support, and we also covered that part as well. And for our service in overseas, we are trying to work with the local NGOs, but we do find that in the local communities in the developing countries is difficult to cover that comprehensive service. But we try to also bring our model in Taiwan, such as we share the work, the way we do in Taiwan, and also we invite our social workers and counselors to go to the local NGOs to work with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? Please, yeah.
I just want to take this opportunity to say hello with the our good friend from Somaliland, Dr. Edna. Yeah, this is Nina. I say hello with you. Yeah, because that we are actually we going to with the twin with the hospital. Yeah, from Java Christian Hospital and the Edna University Hospital. And I think that's the because of pandemic, so we couldn't go over there. But I think that after that the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic go unstable, we will go to the Somaliland to start our the cooperation. So I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for the Dr. Edna. Thank you.
Then I have a question for the issue for migrant and for the and also for Themba. I wonder when UN talk about SDG, does that affect to you? Are you have any thought about using that to communicate or dialogue with the government? Thank you.
Absolutely. Are we beginning our answers now? I think we are. Yes, absolutely. I think that we need to approach these issues through any number of avenues, and the SDG framework is certainly one of those. If we talk about global development, if we talk about the opportunities for the expansion of economies, of intellectual property, of any number of positive attributes to a culture and a community and a nation, and we talk about that in terms of development, there is a role for migrants and refugees and other marginalized populations within that, and trying to negotiate that role, depending on who your audience is, it can always be a bit of a challenge. But using the framework of the SDGs and using the structure and the dedication and the knowledge behind the SDGs, we can find some areas to access openings for marginalized populations. So certainly it's something that we engage. But also I think that we need to engage any number of other frameworks, protections in law around work rights, for example, or migrant worker protections that may be in place that could apply to refugees as well, or that type of thing. So I think that using the SDG framework is certainly essential, but it's only one piece of a much more holistic approach to bringing together any number of actors to make this inclusive approach actually function well. So I appreciate the question, and I hope I've answered it to the best of my ability.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else?
Can I answer to that question?
Okay, sure. Okay. Please, Leslie.
I agree with my colleague about engaging with the SDG. We do engage with the SDG. In fact, part of the SDG promises is to end human trafficking and also create a decent work for the migrant workers. So this is something that we try to pursue. So in every time there is an SDG engagement in regional level, at international, we try to engage. In national level though, we can try to talk to the government, but in our experience it's very difficult because usually government already select people who they work with. And then the problem with the migrants population, we are abroad. We are living in many other countries, and yet within that countries, we are not really recognized as a stakeholder. So it's very difficult to meet even with the immigration, labor department, and so forth. So expressing all those SDG promises is not something very, very simple when it comes to migrants, and I believe even it comes to refugees. So we have to rely a lot to our advocate, people who really travel a lot, have an influence with the government to bring out all these issues.
The last one question, please. Very short, okay? Please.
I'm from the Department of Anthropology at National Taiwan University, and my question is for Dr. Ismail. My question is whether you think that I firstly thank you for your promising message, and my question is, what do you think the public health in your country, is this the independent domain or issue, or it has a more fundamental problem like political freedom, like autonomy of the political economics? What do you think in your perspective for a local in your country? Thank you.
Okay, please. Please, Ismail. Please.
Thank you very much for this question. The public health perspective in my country is the same for every sector. Somaliland is a country that is not internationally recognized by other countries. We have collaboration and trade with many countries, including Taiwan, but we don't have a seat in the United Nations. We are not internationally recognized. This brings poverty, exclusion from international platforms where we could have a voice and where we could share ideas and resources with the rest of the world. As far as public health is concerned in Somaliland, we have a democratic government, and we have a Ministry of Health that is responsible for the public health of Somaliland. With the good intentions that we have, our results are always affected by the level of resources and expertise that we have in the country. Somaliland is a country that is recovering from a devastating war for 11 years. So it is only the last 30 years that we have started to rebuild a country, to remove landmines, to bring our people back from refugee camps, to unite family members together who lost each other. And only when we were coming out of the darkness and we were coming out to provide a reasonable level of health care, then Corona pandemic also came and knocked us down. So we have a voice, we have elected government, we have a Ministry of Health, but the resources are limited. And thank you very much for that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for four distinguished presenter. Give us a very inspiring, caring presentation. And I also want to thank you all your participation of this section. So we shall end this section here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.